Great presentations from you both. Really appreciate it. We have a fair amount of questions to go over. The first one is for both of you. In California, there's often much more concern around water conservation in drought years. How do droughts relate to the water energy climate nexus?
Great, fantastic question. I'll jump in, and then Chris, if you want to jump in as well. That's a great question. Some of the work we've done at the Pacific Institute is, after droughts, we tend to do sort of a look back on what were the impacts of the drought. We've done this in particular looking at the impacts of drought on hydropower. As you might imagine, during a drought, there's typically less hydropower. That can increase costs. Hydropower is typically one of the lesser expensive, or historically has been among the least expensive. It also can result in higher greenhouse gas emissions, depending on what we're replacing that hydropower with. So, I think, as I mentioned, as I sort of referenced really quickly, we tend to see during a drought both challenges on water supply side, but also in energy as well. I agree. Historically, we do see a lot of action around water efficiency during drought. That's when we tend to pass policies. But I do think, and I showed in one of the figures that showed the trend in Bay Area usage, we see reductions even outside, and it's because of the standards and codes. It's because of all the policies at a state level, and because of the programs that a lot of water utilities are running year round. We do see more activity, more interest, more attention. I also, though, am seeing a really big shift in public perception around drought and water scarcity. I think in particular, the 87-92 drought, I think, was very eye-opening for many who remember it anyway, and who lived here. And I think the 2012, 2016, and then again, we had another smaller one, 2019 to 2021. I think the idea of drought is really hitting home with people, and I think they are seeing it as the need for conservation, and I would argue efficiency as a way of life. I just think there's been a big shift in recognizing the limits we face around water, and how those are going to be increasing over time due to climate change. So I think we've hit really a tipping point there, and I think we'll see a lot more uptake, frankly, in non-drought years. I don't know, Chris, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I would just say that the impact of climate is that the drier periods will be longer, hotter, and drier, and the wet periods will be shorter, more intense, more destructive. And so it's the impact is that the swings in the climate will be more intense. So the state has been very forward-looking in its policy, and this move toward water conservation as a California way of life, I feel, is a strategic to stabilizing the resources of water, especially when the droughts return for long periods of time. And also there's another factor here, which is population growth. Water is a limited resource. It's not like sunlight, where you can put up more solar systems to gather energy. So the conservation focus is also around preserving enough resources to accommodate the population growth in the state.
Thanks. And on the topic of it being a limited resource, we have a question for Heather around brackish water desalination. First is, are there any other locations in California aside from the Delta where brackish water desal is feasible?
Was that in the Delta? Is that the question?
Yeah, that was identified as where it is feasible, but are there any other locations?
Yeah, so the brackish desalination can reference both surface water, which I think is what's happening in and around, I think, Antioch and other places. There are also, though, brackish groundwater. That's typically where you see more of that brackish desalination. happening, and there are places where they are doing that now, and opportunities for more as well. There was a report from the Department of Water Resources just a few years ago that tried to sort of estimate where those opportunities were in California. But typically it is groundwater more so than surface water.
Okay, and a follow-up on that one. Do you know, as far as energy demands between brackish and just straight up seawater, how, and you showed us a graph in your presentation kind of highlighting the difference, but is that difference enough to make brackish water a feasible strategy? And what if we threw renewable power sources in there too?
Yeah, great question. And part of the challenge is brackish water. The definition of brackish water, the salinity of brackish water can be quite variable. Whereas seawater, at least here, has a certain salinity. And the energy requirements for desalination are sort of directly proportional to the salinity of the water. So the more saline it is, the more energy it requires to remove those salts. And so that's why you see quite a bit of variability in the energy intensity of brackish water, because the definition of brackish water is quite wide. There's a lot of differences in salinity. So, it really depends. In some places you're reducing, you're taking out not that much salt, so it's not as energy intensive, and others, if it's a lot, it's more energy intensive. And there are, I think, opportunities for renewables. I think, though, one of the things to keep in mind is that, desalination plants, all sorts of them, tend to operate better consistently. So you would need to use battery or some way for storage to do that. There are projects in particular. Australia has really, when they went through a phase of building quite a few seawater desalination plants during their millennium drought. Rather than directly powering those with renewables, they did sort of an offset. So that's another option, and that's true for any water supply, not just desalination. But if you're looking at renewables, you could probably look at kind of offsetting, because of the need for continuous energy for those facilities typically.
Awesome. It's really fascinating. We'll shift gears. This one's for Chris. Okay, so this might have been covered, but what happens if the water utility cost on the water bill actually goes up due to rates increasing, and or underestimates of savings, but is not due to a needed repair? And I can reword that if that didn't come out good.
I think I get the idea. Is there what's the risk that a participant in water upgrade saves bill would actually go up beyond their savings? When a utility increases its rates, the savings increase for the customer if they have their efficient fixtures installed. So rate increases, that being in the program positions the customer, gives them some protection against rate increases. And as I mentioned in the presentation, we have that 20% buffer of utility bill savings that is not included when we calculate the on-bill charge. So that and the useful life of the product, the repayment term being only up to 80% of the useful life of the product, those are buffers that protect the customer from that situation.
And another one for you, Chris. Could water upgrade saves function as a mass market direct install heat pump water heater program? Water efficiency measures would best be paired with heat pump water heaters to yield enough water cost savings to meet the program's requirements when installing a single family residential heat pump water heater.
We are not a direct install program, so adding a heat pump water heater to our program, it would have to function as the other fixtures that we provide do. We have looked into that, and recent developments in water, heat pump water heater technology. The price has gone down. There's more efficiency in that sector now, and we're planning to take a second look at that because the economics were sort of in the ballpark, but not quite a couple of years ago when we researched it. So that is on my to-do list to look at heat pump water heaters again. But we would not be able to provide them as a direct install because that's not the type of program we are.
Makes sense. And this one is related to appliances, so kind of directed to both of you. First question is, how about a combo heat pump washer dryer or combo heat pump washer dryer appliances compared to front load appliances as far as energy efficiency? Are the combination ones more energy efficient, or are there?
I'm not sure I understand. Is this a product where the washer and the dryer are the same unit?
Yes, I believe that's.
I do not have knowledge on that topic to share. I'd have to look that up.
Similarly, I haven't looked at that as well, but definitely worth looking at. So thank you for raising that.
And then follow up on appliances as well. Would a simple system, laundry to landscape, be considered a zero energy water resource? Since water or washer pump, the washer pump is used whether or not the water is reused.
Right. I would include that, and there's also an energy savings there, and that the wastewater is not being taken to a wastewater treatment facility where would have been additional energy usage. So in fact, I think of that as not only as an energy saving sort of water source, sort of a negative energy. And there are some utilities, including I think SFPUC, if you happen to be in their service area, that do provide rebates for those sort of laundry, the landscape types of systems. There may be others in the Bay Area as well.
Thank you. This one's for Chris. How does the complexity of the water system affect the ability to run a regional water energy conservation program?
It just makes it more complex. So, and I think that the fact that a lot of the water wholesalers also run the water conservation programs for their members or the utilities that they serve is a nod to the fact that it's a very complex system, and people have already found ways to organize as a group to deliver these efficiency services to multiple utilities at a time, so that the small utility is not reinventing the wheel each time.
Okay. And this one's for both of you. How do we balance encouraging a decrease in water use with the related decrease in revenues for utilities, which have significant capital costs? Have there been discussions at the state level about changing the rate structure for water utilities to address this?
I can jump in, and then Chris, if you want to. I think this is a really important question. And I think there's lots of things we can and should be doing. You know, just to start, and this could be a 20-minute conversation, so I'll do my best. It could be an hour, frankly. I'll do my best to keep it sort of short. But, you know, I think, you know, as is embedded in here, I think the utility business model has been really supply side oriented, and it's been around selling more and more water. And we know that that is not sustainable and it's not resilient, particularly in light of climate change. And so that's causing, I think, a shift, a need for a shift in thinking. I would point out, and this almost gets at kind of the earlier question about the bill savings and the utility rates went up. You know, as we are saving water, we're avoiding the need for we're delaying or deferring or eliminating the need for new expensive water supply and treatment infrastructure. So there's an important avoided cost. There have been a number of really good studies, and I'll pop a link in the chat in just a moment, where we synthesize them, but a number of great studies that said, well, what would it look like if we hadn't conserved? What if we needed to develop more supply, and we know that next increment of supply is far more expensive. When you look at it that way, there have been some dramatic savings. Los Angeles, that number's at the top of my brain, so I'll give you that one. Over a 26-year period in Los Angeles, because of their efficiency programs, they avoided $11 billion in water costs, water supply and treatment costs. And they estimate about the same amount on the wastewater side, although the study didn't look at that. That's a significant cost savings that's passed on to customer. We don't often think about avoided costs. It's hard to wrap our brains around it, but it is a really important piece. You mentioned, Adam, rates, and I think the person mentioned rates as well. I do think we need to think about our rates. And I don't think it's a state level. Rates are really set at a local level, but there are ways that we can adjust our rates, update our rates, and revise them to address reductions in demand. I do think the other thing I'll really add, and it's something I've worked on a lot, is the critical importance of demand forecasting. Historically, utilities have forecasted their demand is going to go up when in fact it stayed flat or declined. And so they were planning for a future of more water rather than less. And so because of that, there was an emphasis on developing some of those new supplies. And I think we need to do a much better job. And I am seeing improvement, but we have a ways to go in terms of ensuring that we're planning for a realistic future. And so I think there's a lot we can do there. So I'll stop there. There's far more I think we need to rethink in terms of the business model, but those I think just give you a little bit of a flavor of some of that.
And just a time check, sorry, Chris, to cut you off there. You can continue answering, but we got about 3 minutes left for this Q&A session.
Okay, I will just a footnote here on this topic. In the Water Upgrade Save program, the utility sets the demand reduction target. And that's because we are very sensitive to that they have to balance their water conservation goals with their revenue. So it's up to the utility how much reduction they want to generate by participating in our program.
Awesome. All right, with the limited time, I'll try and squeeze in, we don't have any combined questions really, so I'll try and squeeze in one for both of you. The first one, we'll go to Heather. Can you please talk about the other part of the water energy nexus and the role of renewable energy in mitigating California's carbon footprint as it relates to water conveyance?
Yeah, great question. And there's a couple things there. I think, on the one hand, I think there's opportunities for, renewables. And part of what we looked at in that study was decarbonization of the grid. So you sort of saw that kind of play out in some of the results. There are also opportunities for in-conduit hydro, for example, and, looking at wastewater. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of energy in wastewater. And very few utilities, wastewater utilities are using that. I think we'll see a shift in that. I think East Bay Mud is here in the Bay Area, a shining example of the opportunity there. But we can be generating far more energy from water and from wastewater in particular. I'll also say on the flip side, and we've done some work around this, not for California, but the Intermountain West, how the transition to renewables, in particular solar PV and wind, has helped to reduce the water requirements for energy and has reduced pollution, right? As mining is quite a polluting activity. And so there's, I think, lots of, good news out there and opportunities for us to become more sustainable and resilient, both on the water and energy side.
All right, Ryan, we have time for
And we will actually cut it there just to make sure we have a chance to get a quick break in for everyone. We do have a quick announcement from Jennifer West from Stop Waste in Alameda County, and then we will take a quick break.